very proud of the logo because designers love to put typography on a circle, but it kind of looks like a butthole. So it makes sense for this website. We have also a bot. His name is Bot Tom. It's not launched yet, but later this month it's going to be live, so check it out. So yeah, I do a lot of posters, and I've done so many at this point that it got a few months ago that I had no idea or where to start, or kind of like had to decide to make it more fun for me. And I ate this beautiful millennial-looking bagel. I was like, I wish I could do a poster like this. So I was like blurry. It was like, oh, okay. So then it kind of became like a game. I was like, I'll see these like weird things in real life and kind of like process it and try to do these posters as quick as possible in like the most dumb way without the client knowing what I was doing. And sometimes, people order stuff. I'm like, I could have done that. I was like, all right, I'll take a photo and transform it into a poster. Yeah, so it kind of just became a game. And sometimes one of the weirdest places ever, I would photograph. Sometimes I would go to, before shower, photograph Old Navy boxer shorts and kind of transform it into a poster. And then, sometimes I would just play with silly stuff and boom, poster. So I know, I was like trying to find the dumbest way to make a poster. Chairs are nice, but then I saw this other chair and I had to do like something else to it because I've done a chair before. I did laundry, it looked cool. It rained and there's stuff on the street, so I was kind of the poster. I saw this beautiful pole. I was like, ooh, poster. I don't know. And then on Twitter, I saw this image. It's like, all right, I'll make my own version of it. I don't really read Fox News, but if you go through it, it is ridiculous. So, poster. The Mueller report came out. I was like, all right. And sometimes, you don't really need to do anything. It's kind of like simple. But the ultimate challenge was really trying to capture the essence of New York City, and really made it hard for me because 2 images, and yeah, I did the poster we did. And it's been kind of funny because I've been posting this stuff online, the process, and sometimes the posters are not that good, but the story behind kind of is more funny than the final result. But people started sending me photos of stuff for me to play around with, and it's been kind of funny. And it was like, this is where I draw the line. Like, I did poop 2 weeks ago, so come on. But yeah, so while I started doing or using this as a process for my posters, yeah, I was trying to find a way, like, how can I make a typeface as quickly as possible since I'm just like messing around with like images I found. So I started doing these typefaces like the worst way as possible, and that's why I call this talk bad typography. So I just really like write down the alphabet in Helvetica and just add blurs to it, the noise. It doesn't work without the noise for some reason. But yeah, there's all different Photoshop effects or filters do something different to the letters. And so it's like a measure, kind of playing around with it. And it's really the worst way to design typeface because when a client wants to change something, I'm like, no, you cannot. So yeah, but it is really easy and fun, and it's like messing around, and it's always a different result. And then another way that I design typefaces, I kind of just like slice them up, almost like a digital collage, and really destroy them completely. And it's kind of funny to be here because at this point I've destroyed so many typefaces from people that talked here before. So yeah, it is playing around. And I have this guy that asked me to do posters, and it's really annoying because it sends me the information through Instagram messages. So sometimes I just like take a screenshot and like mess with the letters, and not always works. When it doesn't work often, I just end up. Oh, sorry, I'm talking too fast. Yeah, the levels, it's really what makes the trick. Anyway, sometimes it doesn't really work, so I just take a photo of my screen and then like fuck with it. So it's sort of like this process, like whatever. And the ultimate challenge is really transforming poop and peep into something nice. This one I recorded incorrectly, but I was doing it in reverse. And yeah, it really works with every typeface, and it's a matter of like, if you add one Photoshop filter, it looks bad, but if you add like 30 Photoshop filters, it really starts looking cool. So yeah, this is my talk. Yeah, come to the store. It's kind of funny. We have an online store as well, and most people that buy our stuff from Brooklyn. So it is a real space. You can go to the store and talk and look at stuff, or if you want to teach a class, you can go there and do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Valeria. Our next speaker is Lisa Strasville. Lisa is an information architect, data visualization entrepreneur, and principal of information art. She has worked at Gallup, Bloomberg, and was previously a partner at Pentagram. Her clients have included One Laptop Per Child, GE, the Museum of Art and Design, Bloomberg, MIT, and the New York Times. In 2010, Lisa was awarded the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Interaction. She currently holds a senior research position at the New School, where her focus is on envisioning a better future for our day-to-day information experiences. Please welcome Lisa.
Okay. Hello. Welcome to the nerdy portion of the conference. Okay. And thank you so much. It's really a delight to be here in such great company. Okay. All right. So I've been thinking about the future of information for a couple reasons. The first is that the future of data is in really deft hands, as you'll see in the next talk by Georgia Lupi. And also, the second reason, I have over 100,000 unread email messages in my inbox. And I have some news to share with this audience of people who, like me, use type and care deeply about type. And that's the second title of my talk, which is that I believe documents are dying. And I'm talking about documents of text. And maybe that's okay, actually, because we don't really design many documents anymore. Print or digital. Designers these days are really creating toolkits of marks and visual language, voice, carried by a design system, and type, all in the service of an identity or a brand. So documents may be dying, but type, like data, is very much alive. And typefaces more than ever, because the identity, the brand, needs to travel across multiple platforms and channels. That's another talk. Back to documents and text. So a few years ago, I was asked by an old colleague and friend in a big corporation to look at the future of work in augmented reality. So my studio, Information Art, did a full audit of the tools we use, how we collaborate and create work. But it was a few quick sketches that really captured my imagination about what was possible. First, we imagined a context that was not two-dimensional and flat, but a space. Second, we imagined that the space was not filled with, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. With an unruly collection of documents and messages like my digital desktop, but something closer to how we think about work in our minds. That moment before we sit down at our laptops, or perhaps put an AR headset on. I don't do that yet, but we imagined a space of projects, work projects, of course, and personal projects, and each one with multiple people. So, I mean, it's a really simple idea, but amazingly, our operating systems haven't really included people. In fact, we do have this kind of artificial division of sort of local, private, my stuff on our laptop compared to our mobile devices, and then there's this like window to take us online. So this simple structure of objects, we could also put messaging and materials in the context of the projects. And we imagined, of course, that it could work in other spaces or projected over augmented reality or over our spaces. And then we could organize projects by time. So this seemed promising. And then Takaki Okada, the designer I work most closely with, who worked with me from Pentagram days, we were also working on, with Gallup at the time, redesigning their report documents. And we started some experiments to see if we could somehow bring text basically into 3D and make sort of objects out of documents. And even though we had actually gone into the reports and massaged them to be very hierarchical in terms of research claims and findings and trends, these experiments actually were not convincing to me. They didn't really work. And so I kind of put the 3D text and space thing aside. And then I did remember, going quickly, this project from right when the iPad came out. This one was done with a brilliant designer who I think is here, Hilla Katke. And this one was we were asked to experiment with interpretive content on a tablet in the Art Institute of Chicago for these objects, for 6 objects. So it was kind of an experiment of putting a tablet in a museum. And we imagined that, the goal of a curator, educator is to really sort of build a context around the object, this kind of network of information around an object and how it connects to sort of social, cultural, like form making. And what we realized is that all of this context and material was in the form of these documents, the tombstones, I think, as they're called. And what we did was we basically extracted a kind of network of objects about provenance, about the material, the form, from this document. So, and that became our interface, and it was basically sort of allowing visitors to kind of, through images, kind of connect to the world, the context around each of these objects. So then, a couple years ago, a little over a year and a half ago, we started working on a project with a lot of documents that were being authored as we were working. This was for the Yale School of Management, the business school, and a research team. So there was a team that was put together to write case studies of ideally every financial intervention deployed during every financial crisis in history, starting mainly with the 2008 global financial crisis, and with the overall goal of helping to prevent the next one. And the idea was not a diagnostic tool to predict a crisis, but a toolkit of interventions that were used in the past. And so Information Art was hired to basically design and build a home for these case studies. The target users are around 1,000 central bankers around the world, and one key use case we had to consider was how they might use this collection of case studies in the case of a crisis. They were being authored by this incredible research team that a lot of them whom were lawyers as Word documents. So the first thing we thought of was, well, we have to solve for the ability to access the documents. And this seemed easy and a problem we've solved a zillion times, which is basically like providing some meaningful navigation, which usually has some intelligent ways of organizing, in this case, financial crises. So the goal here is to provide some navigation, get the user to the document or the documents that they need. But it seemed like there was something else we could do. We didn't know quite what it was, but we had this idea to make each document about each financial intervention really large and immersive, if you will. And we printed them out as these long scrolls, and we hung them up in the office. And we hung them side by side. And this, of course, forced us to make decisions about the size of the type and what we might read at certain distances. And then we started to see connections across the documents. These are kind of things that you can ask of data, but typically not of text. And seeing across them seemed kind of interesting. So all the documents have this, have a bunch of key design decisions. Design in this context refers to the design of a financial program. We discovered that we could align and label the type of key design decisions for each category of financial intervention. And in hindsight, we were doing a kind of machine learning, a sort of human version of machine learning on these documents. So what's the big deal? How is this any better than just a collection of online documents? Well, now, like data, we can compare interventions across categories. These were still mock-ups and sketches. And we can ask questions of the collection as a whole. So now this is showing kind of getting into sort of segments of documents, which is actually kind of not that easy to do. Let's see. And then by articulating and labeling the structure of the interventions, it can become a template that can be used by a central banker to design a new program. So we've just launched the sort of first minimum viable product for this, and it has this key feature, this sort of matrix feature. In many ways, the research team is working, I would say, sort of two-dimensionally. They're kind of out of their documents, which I think is quite interesting. Okay, I told you it would be nerdy, and I think I'm right. Okay. So now I'll move, how am I doing on time? Now I'll move to Professor Gina Lorio-Walker. She is a professor of women's studies at the New School. We met in the fall of 2018, and she's been leading this female biography effort to kind of recover what she calls missing matter, which is not just women we've not heard of before, but also the knowledge they've possessed that doesn't somehow like fit into this masculinist, as she says, knowledge ordering system that we live in. I confess I was a little bit skeptical of a women's history project at first. Why not just include women in history? Isn't it that simple? Just make sure they're represented. Much like the textbook my daughter has been using in 5th grade, which has women and underrepresented people in the margins of the book. This is supposed to be where we're going. But so I knew there was some problem here. Anyway, and also there have been, in the past several years, a number of publications of forgotten women in various fields. You've probably seen those. The New York Times has the Overlooked Forgotten Lives obituaries, which is amazing. But for Gina, this effort is not enough, and women's lives need to be recorded in a different way, a different kind of knowledge ordering system, if you will. And the current biography form is what she calls a hero biography, a male biography. It's a man, his life, and his work, and female biography requires something different. So I was starting to get it, but my aha moment was when Gina said this: women's lives, historically, were never meant to be public. And this line almost brought me to tears, because I felt like I really got it then. And what I understand now is that the stories of extraordinary women's lives throughout history require a new kind of biography template, a new form of document, if you will, one that addresses the particular challenges women have faced as their contributions led them from the private into the public life, including the overall context of their time and place, a lack of credentialed education, gender bias, and the expectations around marriage and children. So we started working together, and the project was called The New Historia, and now it's called the Hayes Collection, which is after Mary Hayes, who was a autodidact, self-educated British scholar who wrote the first English collection of female biographies published in 1803. 302 women from Sappho to her present, and the 6-volume set was in Jane Austen's library, and Gina Walker was asked to update it by the Jane Austen Library Press, Chawton House Press. She assembled a group of scholars around the world, a very feminine thing to do, I think, and it was published in 2014. So that in turn inspired the Cooper engine, which is what I'm about to show you, or at least the first version of it. It's a new immersive 3D knowledge creation, visualization, discovery tool named after Muriel Cooper, who was my mentor and advisor at MIT. And it's really a new form of a network. Manuel Lima was very prescient in basically saying that the network diagram is the diagram of our time. And I could not agree more. However, I think they're really hard to read. And so a few things converged. This idea of how can we move beyond this form of biography to express what it means to create a female biography. And by the way, I think it's important that this applies to men as well. Suddenly, the private of men who've made significant contributions, their private lives are somehow more relevant in this Time's Up moment, which I think is really important. And then there was an opportunity to collaborate with this incredibly talented studio in Portland, where I will be again this summer. We'll be working together again. That does a lot of mixed reality work. It's called Glowbox. Okay, so I'll get to this project. The Cooper engine, the first version of the Cooper engine is really a time-based network, and it's inspired by, so this is a sort of cluster of biological and non-biological, but mostly biological connections around Mary Hayes, who was born in 1759, died in 1843, and these blue links, a little hard to see, represent her work. Some of her work, 1803, you can see the female biography. And I imagine, these were the sketches that were brought to create this first version of the Cooper engine, which the original build of it was in virtual reality. And the idea was to combine these timelines with the network diagram, and that was basically the idea. So I'm going to show that to you. This is Gina Walker with her Samsung Galaxy headset, and this is the group of scholars who all put on the headset when we shared this first prototype with them in the fall. You'll see, I'll move through the space. It's running on my iPad, and you'll see a reference to Mary Shelley in this amazing piece by Jill Lepore, historian, who talks about the writing of Frankenstein in the context that's not really been shared before of Mary Shelley's basically dead children. She had 4 children, she buried 3. The first, she wrote Frankenstein after, well, I'll show you in the space. Okay. And now I am instructed to switch to the iPad. Okay. So this, oh, I don't want to do that. Okay. Okay, so I'll navigate as best I can here. It is much better in virtual reality, but that would only be a solitary experience, so I'll just take you through. So you see, I'm going to start with Mary Hayes, and you see her timeline here, born in 1759. She was engaged to this fellow, John Eccles, who apparently died on the eve of their wedding, so his line ends in 1780, and then Mary Hayes started writing. As one does. Can't help myself. Female biography, you see there, 1803. Other connections over there, but I'm going to pull back and also feature Mary Wollstonecraft, who I hadn't heard of, but apparently is quite a well-known early feminist British 18th century, also born in 1759. There she is. And she was the mother of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. Mary Wollstonecraft passed away in 1797, 10 days after Mary Shelley was born. So you see her line ends where Mary Shelley's begins. Actually, there's so many things we can do typographically that we'll be continuing to explore, but I'll show you one cool feature, which is that the type just seamlessly kind of flips. You barely notice it, so you never see the back of the type. That seemed like an unsolvable problem a long time ago, but now it seems very simple. So there's Mary Shelley. There is, there's Frankenstein, and you can see her first child, who she never named, much like, well, identical to the monster in Frankenstein, was unnamed. So there she is, baby girl, and then you can see her one surviving child, Percy Shelley. Some other really amazing connections in this cluster that Jill Lepore also notes, like Ada Lovelace, who's the daughter of Lord Byron, and then this very sad story about this Clara Byron, who was Clara Clement. Anyway, there's lots of stuff going on here. And, okay, let me return to the laptop. And, okay, I'm going to leave you with one last thought, the Mueller investigation. When this was going on, there were, 2 years of this investigation. There were some incredible visualizations. This was done in the Times about the network of events. Oh, wait, let me go back to my notes. Hold on. Okay. In our heads, we imagined meetings, testimonies, indictments, convictions, representing all these events before the election. And again, I remember this very rich sort of network, in effect, and over time in my head about what this would mean about what we all cared about Trump's activities, and some great visualizations. And then this happened, the Mueller report. Pages and pages, 448 pages. And the visualizations became about the document and the redactions. And suddenly I felt like it was almost like a closed book. So my question for us is, can we imagine a world where we no longer author reports as 448-page documents? What if the full report was a network diagram, timelines of events, people, relationships, and perhaps maybe the recommendations from Mueller could be like a 2-page document of some kind a summary. So this is the question. Is the document dead? Should it be? And what's our future of information? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. All right. Our next speaker is Georgia Lupi. She is an award-winning information designer who challenges the impersonality of data, designing visual narratives that reconnect numbers to what they stand for: stories, people, ideas. She has been named one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business in 2018, and she recently joined MIT Media Lab as Director's Fellow. Her work is part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. She's the co-author of Dear Data and the new interactive book, Observe, Collect, Draw, A Visual Journey. And she is currently a recent partner at Pentagram in New York. Please welcome Georgia.
Hi, everyone. How are we doing? My name is Georgia. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm not a traditional graphic designer, just as Lisa. I define myself as an information designer, and that means that every day I work with data, qualitative and quantitative, big and small, data that organizations already have or sometimes crafted by myself, and I represent this information visually, so translating numbers into images. And so I always start by saying that data for me is primarily a lens that I use to filter our world and our reality one subject at a time, and then a narrative and design material that I use for my projects. I would say that it's the language that I learned to use over the years as a designer. And as a bit of a background, I used to work for a company that I co-founded 8 years ago called Accurate. We are together with a team of 40 people split between Milan and New York. We've worked on many different fields, healthcare, finance, cultural institutions, and tech companies, and producing very different outputs, every day shaping the way that our clients interact with this information through data visualization and through building interactive experiences out of the visualization. And these are some examples of our work where, of course, every color, size, and position of the elements that you're seeing is the representation of a data point. And recently, at the end of last month, after a long process, I took a big step in my career, and I joined Pentagon, which it's a design firm that you might have heard of if you sit in this audience, as a partner in their New York office. And joining Pentagon for me means expanding, really trying to expand my practice and explore even more how data and data visualization can be integrated really truly as part of our everyday experience in what we wear, what we see, what we use. And also to challenge myself as a designer, how can we inject this new language even more into how we design on a daily basis? And so today I'll talk about data from these perspectives and with these premises, and I will guide you through how actually I discover the beauty and even the humanity in data, how I am experimenting with it, and also what I envision for the role that data and data visualization can play in the coming years. So to start, I'm taking you back to 2012 in Italy, where we started to collaborate with the Sunday cultural supplement of the main Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera, where from 2012 to 2014, we designed more than 40 data analyses and visualizations. And so the purpose of this column was explicitly to explore what can be done with data journalism and data visualization, and also to push the boundaries of the discipline and to make a sort of a stress test. So how much of a complexity can a reader absorb? So every week we looked for data on a main topic, combining and overlaying different information about cultural and social phenomena with many layers of context that we visualize every time with a unique language that was created and crafted specifically for the data stories that we found, as you can see from these previews. And because we were not data scientists or computer scientists, but designers, rather than just looking at the numbers and visualizing them directly, we focused really on the reality that these numbers represented. And from there, we imagined how to distill it into the best representation. And we also started to experiment on how data visualization could even become almost a meditative language for the reader to decode. And to learn that complexity can be our friend, and we can use design to let people in and invite them to dig into the data and spend time with the data. Always, of course, providing a legend, like a key to understand how to dig into these novel languages. And personally, because of this process, I loved breaking free from the boundaries of the typical charts that you usually see, charts that many times cannot really convey the depth of the richness of the reality that we live in. And it was really illuminating for me, and it helped me define our still approach data and data visualization in 2019. But we can, of course, blur these boundaries even further beyond the two-dimensional environment and the places that we normally are used to see data. So, for example, in a recent collaboration with Starbucks, we built a 100-foot wide data wall that was carved and etched, perforated and backlighted in brass for the first Starbucks research roastery in Italy that opened in Milan last September. And so in this case, exploring how data can be a material we can use to tell stories in spaces, and also how unconventional building materials could foster new ways to representing data. So this wall tells the story and the journey of Starbucks with a timeline of the most important moments in the brand history, a map of all of the places that were touched by the company, and a background data layer that explains the coffee making process for most of their most famous blends. And then once we designed the wall, we thought, how interesting would it be to make this data even more part of the physical experiences in the physical space? And then we also designed and developed a mobile app that through augmented reality brings this data to life, making this information even more accessible for visitors. So in a way, adding a digital layer that interacts with this physical space as well, and where the wall is really turned into a living artwork with access to extra content that can be experienced in this immersive and visual way. And so I guess that you start seeing the power of data as a narrative materials, not necessarily only in obvious context, such as reports or magazine, if we design the right type of experiences that go along with it. And you know, to take it even further and to the very core of what we can do with data, I'll move right now very far away from technology, and I will dig into highly personal stories made of data. In 2014, I embarked in a self-initiated year-long collaboration project called Dear Data that I used to say that it was for me the big data hangover cure. A collaboration with London-based designer Stephanie Pozovic. So Stephanie and I met only twice in our life, where we decided to run this very radical experiment around one main question. Is it possible to get to know another human being through data only? So for Dear Data, every weekend for 1 year, we used our personal data to get to know each other. Personal data around weekly shared mundane topics, from our thoughts and ideas to our most intimate feelings, from our belongings to our apologies and laughters. So 52 excuses and pretexts in form of data to investigate and reveal a particular aspects of ourselves and our days. So personal data that we would then manually hand-drawn on a postcard side sheet of paper that was every week sent from London to New York, where I live, and from New York to London, where she lives. Where the front was always a data drawing, and the back of the postcard contained the address of the other person, of course, and the legend, how to interpret our drawings. And so Stephanie and I spent 1 year collecting our data manually to force us to focus on all of the nuances that computer cannot gather, or at least not yet, using data to explore our minds and not only our activities, and getting insights on the things that really mattered mostly to us, more than numbers of steps or calories intake. Like at week number 3, for example, we tracked the thank yous that we said and we received. And through the data collection and through the data visualization, for example, I realized that I thank mostly the people that I don't know. Apparently, I'm a compulsive thanker to waitresses and waiters, but I definitely don't thank enough the people who are close to me. And so we started to look at our days through data, but not only quantifying the numbers of times that we performed a certain action, such as in this case where I mapped my complaints, borrowing a very literal visual inspiration from the music notation system to show the repetitiveness of my complaints over time. So, but not only quantifying the numbers, but instead adding context and details about why, what was the feeling, what was the situation, realizing week after week how to put ourselves into these numbers, and the importance of adding context and qualitative aspects to make this data truly representative of ourselves. And ultimately, we have been using data as our unique language. We like to say that in our correspondence, we didn't speak English or Italian, we spoke data. So Dear Data became also a book that it is this 3rd edition, and well, the original collection of postcards has found the most exciting home because it has been acquired as part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. But what excites me even more is that Dear Data has been so well received outside the data and design community. So we've seen thousands of postcards made by people who learned about the project and wanted to experiment on themselves. And even teachers of any grade are using this format to teach their students the world of data. And so in a way, by starting small and very easy, that has opened the idea of data to a wider audience. It has made it more approachable and even fun. So we've seen that we can turn even the smallest details of our lives into data that we can look at to see things from a new perspective. But besides personal data, I believe that we can do this everywhere. I'm often asked, where do you find your data? And I'm lately replying more and more that I often design my data sets. And to this point, in 2017, I had the great honor to collaborate with Paola Antonelli. She's the senior curator for art and architecture, for design architecture at the Museum of Modern Art, and with her team on a show that was called Items, Is Fashion Modern?, which some of you might have seen if you were in New York. So the show presented 111 items of clothing and accessories that have had a strong impact and influence on our culture. From the bikini to the burkini, from the Patagonia fleece jacket to the balaclava, from the little black dress to the Palestinian keffiyeh. And I've had this incredible opportunity to create a site-specific hand-drawn visualization to guide visitors to explore the features of the items, so both individually and part of a bigger ecosystem. A really big piece that was in a 6th-floor lobby. But what is interesting here is that I didn't have any data. I only had the list of the 111 objects and the background research conducted by the curatorial team on each of them. And so I put on the glasses of the data collector and delved into these stories in search of bits of qualitative and quantitative information that could help me answer a few main questions to really understand and reveal why was each of the items included in this show. And I asked to all of the items, for example, is it a medium or a message? Meaning, is it iconic and included in the show because of its technical and aesthetical features or for what it represented? And are they worn to conform to a movement or to escape, meaning as it become a way to blend into a social context or to break free from it? And many more of this kind, really crafting a data set from these questions. And then each one of the items became a symbol that I drew on the wall, positioned and visualized according to this set of attributes that I built together with the curators, with the legend on the left side wall to how to interpret it. And so the whole point of my exercise was to start from the final manifestation of this process and work backward, sort of like reconstructing the invisible data set that Paula and her team used as an input for their design, even without knowing it, and then making it visible for everyone to see through the lens of data. And let me pause for a second. I think that we are in a pretty defining moment in time where people are finally touching with their hands the relevance of data in their lives. And in this moment, as designers who work with data, we finally have an audience that is big and invested enough so that we can really explore data limits and potentials into a large-scale projects and challenging the assumptions that we had about data. And I really believe we are in a turning point for a specific reason, because at this point, we all know as customers, we are all aware that the companies and the brands that we love and use every day collect and analyze and use the data that we, customers, make available to them. And in a moment where the conversations around privacy and what a fair use of personal data is are rising, these companies will necessarily have to open up to us about the process. Owning the fact that they're collecting data, starting different conversations and shaping new relationship with us through this data, really giving a measurable value back to us on the other side, besides ads and recommendation. And because we're not all data scientists, so many of us have no use of raw data on a spreadsheet. And so I believe that it's only through design that we can shape meaningful experiences with this data in a form that we all can understand. And so in the last part of the talk, I'll show you a few other examples of how I think that this dialogue could evolve that I've started to explore. For example, in 2017, Target, one of the main sponsors of the TED conference in the Vancouver edition, asked us to find a way to engage the attendees through their data. And we created a quite unusual data-driven experience. We designed and produced what we called data portraits of all of the people who were at TED. So images based on people's answers to a series of questions and translated on a hand-drawn representation where every color, symbol, and position of the elements that you're seeing is, of course, a direct translation of one person's answers. And then these images were immediately printed on buttons that people would wear throughout the conference on top of their TED badges and use as a tool for sparking conversations and finding commonalities with others. So we asked simple but somehow personal questions, and as you can read on the legend, such as, which TED letter are you? Technology, entertainment, or design? Do you get your best ideas after an adult beverage or while at work? How messy is your desk? Or how many unread emails in your inbox before you freak out? And the people at TED were wearing this abstract symbol on their badges, really using them to identify similarities and differences with other people at a first glance as an excuse to introduce themselves, an icebreaker to start a conversation that was definitely more meaningful than, hi, I'm George, I'm a designer, what do you do? Knowing the meaning behind the colors and symbols on the other person's button. And so in this tiny experiment, we sort of prototyped a model where the data that I share generates an output that gives tangible value back to me. In this case, because of the specific context, in form of a keepsake to create more interesting conversation. But from here, there's a lot that can be explored and imagined. And so another example, when the team at Google News Initiative asked us an original take for how to look at their data, meaning Google search data, we decided to let people define their frame of reference to interpret the data that they will see after by engaging them in the actual production of data. And as a topic in a challenging moment of international tensions rising, we decided to focus on the idea of hope and using it at our lens to dig in. And so we created what we called Building Ops, a mobile app that lets you create physical structures that represents the idea, the concepts, and the movement that you might be hopeful for, and using these entities as a means to access Google Trends data. So as the experience starts, you're already in augmented reality setup, and you're presented with floating topics to select from: medical discoveries, improving education, achieving gender equality. So ideas that you might be helpful for that you can tap and give a weight to. And rocks that you then can place in a specific location in the world in AR to share with other people. And once the sculpture is created, then it can be used as a way to access Google Trend data of the topic of your choice, which was our client's original request, revealing how people around the world are searching and have searched for the same concepts over time, and seeing how many people who are using the app are also hopeful for the same ideas and context, and in a way making you reflect upon the data you're seeing in a conversation with yourself at that moment. And so the idea is that by picking what you're hopeful for before starting, you engage in a conversation that you already have a stake in, and even data coming from a brand become more about you and filtered by what you care about. And so to translate this pretty radical experiment into a more general idea, if we think about what we see on social media, for example, well, at this point, we all know that we live in the bubbles created by our own behavior, like what we like, what we share, seeing pretty much only the content that confirms our thinking and preferences, and in fact, giving us a partial view of the world. And well, if through a design experience we could make people even more aware that what they chose filters what we see and what is given back to them, well, I think we'll have more opportunities for, should we want it, break free of this bubble we live in by recognizing them first. And to conclude, getting to something we can perhaps all relate to as human beings, I wanted to share with you an even more radical experiment that deals with how medical data is presented and with what is normally not even recorded in this concept. So this project is a collaboration with my dear friend and guitar hero, Kaki King. We actually started to collaborate when John Maeda, can you hear sound here? Okay, I can hear it from here. When John Maeda brought us together a few years ago for a branding project that combined music and data visualization for the 200th year anniversary of the Hennessy VSOP cognac, which I will not get into details about here for time's sake. Kaki and I then fell in love with each other's work immediately and decided to keep exploring together until when 2 years ago, her 3-year-old daughter, Cooper, was diagnosed with a condition called ITP, an autoimmune disease where her body attacks her platelets and leads to spontaneous bruises, burst blood vessels called petechia all over her body, and in the most terrifying cases, even internal bleeding. So for 4 months, until her daughter got out of the danger zone, we collected and combined qualitative and quantitative data from her daughter's test and qualitative observation from Kaki, so data from her life, her home level of stress, the main episode that happened. And we decided, and Kaki decided, to share this very personal journey, but not with words, but through this data that I visualized in a way that you wouldn't probably normally expect from medical data. Because these data were so intimate and so personal, and so I asked myself, can a data visualization evoke empathy and activate us also at an emotional level and not only at a cognitive one? And so I started to structure this fluid timeline to tell the story of this very hard 4 months for Kaki and her family. Every symbol is a data point, every white petal is 1 day, and the rhythm of the days is broken every time that Cooper was admitted to the hospital to check her platelet count. And the burst of red dots represent this value. And we then have data as observed by Kaki herself, like the purple splotches to represent the visible bruises. The more intense, the more Kaki observed that they were intense on Cooper's skin. Or the presence of the pink dots for the petechia. Again, the more, the larger the number, the more Kaki observed these on Cooper's skin. When Cooper was taking her medications, you will see these gray shapes affecting the days. And here is when Cooper had some incidents, such as she fell at the park or she was bitten by a mosquito that caused her skin to worsen. But there's also all that was going on Kaki's life and in her mind. So Kaki tours a lot, and she felt very stressed when away from home in this particular moment in time, and this is indicated with these black dots on the days that she was gone. But in these dark months, there have also been positive moments, such as fun birthday party for Cooper and her brother, or a gray Halloween night that we represented as these bright yellow spots that cheer up the visual in a way. And finally, Kaki also kept track of her own level of stress and hope for the day that she reported on a scale of from 1 to 10 for both emotions that I visualized through this floating line where the dark lines are her fears and the orange lines are her hopes. And all around, we added Kaki's personal notes for the day. And this visual was also used as a musical score by Kaki to create a piece of music that she composed directly from the 4 months of data collection, where the timeline of the song represents what was happening in their life, exactly as the visualization that you saw. And this is the song that you're hearing now. And so, as you can probably see, this is not by any means a scientific representation of data, but I still think that it paints a pretty complete and very sensorial picture of this very personal journey. And many people living similar experiences told us that the visualization made them really feel part of Kaki's story in a way that probably a blog post wouldn't have. And I don't want to say that this can lead to any scientific breakthrough in the medical field. This is not the point of my work. But I believe that there is a world of unexplored, small and intimate data that we often don't see if we apply a straightforward definition of what data is. What if, for example, a hospital and doctors could also speak these type of languages to us? And what if every company or organization that collects our data was open to design the ways we receive our information back and give us endless opportunities to engage with our own data and learn more about ourselves and others in the process? So I often gather what I do and think under the idea of data humanism. That is what I envision like a new renaissance where we as humans and our needs and desires will be the focus of the conversation around data, where we will design ways to include empathy, imperfection, and human qualities into how we interpret and display data to make them faithfully representative of our human nature. Where data-driven design might be replaced by design-driven data because we will design the ways we approach data depending on its unique context every time, and we will design the conversations around data. And where ultimately, instead of using data only to become more efficient, we will all use data to become more human. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a break for a bathroom. Think of questions. We'll have a speaker roundup at the end of the conference, at the end of the day. So think of things. There's lots to think about. So we'll see you soon. Welcome back. We're going to do another spotlight, and Luisa Baeta is going to be here. She's going to give us a short spotlight.
Hi. Oh, this is okay. So we heard a few stories today, and we hear them often in conferences about designers who share their childhood stories about how they were already attracted to letter form when they were young. We heard Joyce Ho showing the bubble letters that she did in her notebooks, and we had ECS talking about her forgery side business. And I love these stories because it's so interesting to see how people get into this strange profession. But my particular route to type was a little bit different, and I ended up studying type design because I found it very, very challenging. I found typography in general very challenging, and I decided to just go all in. So my story is about letter forms being challenging from an early age. I learned to read when I was 4. My mom taught me to read at home because I kept bugging her to read the same books over and over again, and at some point she was bored and decided to teach me. But at 6 is when children in Brazil are properly taught to read in school. And when I was 6, I went to school to be alphabetized. And it was supposed to have been a pretty easy year, but there was a catch. And the catch is that the shapes of the letters were completely different to anything I knew because the school wanted to teach us what they called letters holding hands, which is cursive. And I was not familiar with those letter forms, and I was very challenged by it. It wasn't really, the focus didn't seem to be too much on reading and more on reproducing the cursive forms. And there was a whole thing about bunnies. Each letter was a bunny, and they used to draw faces of bunnies in the counters of the letters, and you had to learn the stories of the bunnies, and I don't know, I didn't quite, I didn't thrive in that environment, and so much so that I ended up having to get special classes in the summer for the only time in my life when I was 6, so clearly a problem child. And the main issue that I had is that I couldn't draw the cursive F. So I remember being in the summer in this class with the teacher with only a handful of other kids, and the teacher had a tray full of sand, and she used to hold my hand and then loop up, loop down, loop up again, and do a little loop, and then shake the sand, and I would do it all over again several times until I learned how to draw the damn cursive F. And if you fast forward it to many years later, I can write the cursive F now. I can design it in many styles. I love doing it. On a good day, I can even do an italic S, so you know. So the point of my story is that type design can be a little intimidating, especially if you're starting out. And if you want to learn it, but you think it's not something that comes naturally to you and it's not something that comes easily to you, don't let that stop you and don't be intimidated and go for it anyway because, you know, you'll draw the cursive F, it'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think a lot of people can relate. I was raised in Soviet Union. I had to learn, when I learned to write English, I had to write in cursive, and then when I came to US, I had to be told how to write in block letters, and it was very, very confusing for a few years. Moving along, though. Our next speaker is Chantal Jachan. Chantal is a graphic designer and writer based here in New York City. Ever since she moved from Lebanon to the US, she has been interested in the ways that language can be both a barrier and a tool for communication. She is a recent graduate of Washington University in St. Louis, She previously interned at Moment, where her team was awarded the IXDA 2018 People's Choice Award for a project that they designed an artificially intelligent companion that redefines how parents pass down their narrative cultures and language to the children. She was also an intern at Michael Beirut's team at Pentagram, and she's currently a freelance designer for Idiopower at Pentagram. So please welcome Chantal.
Hello, thanks Alexander for that intro. I'm so honored to be here today and really excited about all the conversations that everyone's been having since yesterday. I was born in Lebanon, and my family moved to the US when I was 4. We moved to New York in the winter, and it was really cold. We do go back to Beirut once a year to visit family, and a couple years ago, on one of these trips, I became kind of obsessed with Lebanese vernacular type, and I began capturing the landscape in photos from the backseat of my grandpa's car. And if you've never been to Lebanon, let me tell you, the driving conditions make it really difficult to get good pictures. This is real. So that brings me to the project that I want to share with you today, which is my undergraduate thesis on Root, which took the form of a book. I'll be focusing more on the content of the book and its implications rather than the design itself. The project, which consisted of photos I took in the car and interviews I conducted later, explored what modernity might mean for Lebanon, specifically through a typographic and linguistic lens. But before I really dive in, I want to give you a little background on how the project came to be. 2 years ago, as an undergrad, I came here to Typographics and kind of had my mind blown by one specific speaker, Lara Kebtan, who is a Lebanese type designer based in Amsterdam. I actually recently went back in my phone and found this screenshot of a story I posted after the talk. I was super excited. And I think this is a prime example of why representation matters. It was the first time I had ever seen a Lebanese person, and a woman too, up on stage in a setting like this. So back in 2017, Lara spoke about the Arabic type design program that she and Christian Sarkis started at the American University of Beirut, and how their goal is to bridge the gap between the Arabic script and Arabic digital type. Their work focuses on studying the history of the script in order to generate fundamentals for designing typefaces. So that talk was really kind of crazy for me because I've always been fascinated by the Arabic language, and at the time was a budding typography nerd, but I also had never seen those two interests coming and occupying the same space. So I went from not even knowing there was an Arabic type design scene to discovering that we're literally in the middle of a sort of Arabic type design revolution, thanks to recent advancements in type design technology that I'll get into later. And of course, all these amazing pioneers in the field, and I'm sure the list goes on, but these are some of my favorites. So first, I want to explain the 4 characteristics that contribute to Arabic's complexity and make it unfit for Latin-based technology. And just a disclaimer, I'm by no means an expert on this subject. I'm not even a type designer, and I'm still learning the nuances to a lot of this stuff. I'm sure this list could go on, but I've cut it down to 4 simple things. The first one is that we read Arabic from right to left. Second, it's a connected script, so unlike Latin, the letters form words by joining together. Third, Arabic letters are kind of like shapeshifters. Their physical form changes depending on where they appear in a word and what letters they appear next to. So all 4 of these forms up on the screen are actually the same letter, which is kind of crazy. And finally, my favorite characteristic is that Arabic is stretchy. There's a technique called kashida that's used by calligraphers and now typographers to extend certain letters for justification purposes. There are a handful of letters that you can do this with. For example, if you have the word rahim, or merciful, and you want it to take up as much space as the Latin word, you can do this. You can even do this, and you could keep going forever, basically, and it would still read the same way. And we see this technique being used throughout history. So here it's being used in an early 14th century Quran manuscript, and we see it in Lebanon today, and I'm sure in other contemporary settings as well. Here on a road sign to make the Arabic text as long as the French, and here in my favorite airport sign with the same purpose. And so something we hear time and time again is that the written word in the Middle East was and still is the primary form of expression, rather than images like in the West. And the reason for this is that Islam prohibits the making of images of living beings. So, for example, during the Renaissance, when the West was focused on the human body, artists in the Middle East were concentrated on abstract forms of expression, like ornamentation, geometric pattern, and of course, calligraphy. Here's a prayer niche from 14th century Iran. There are no images whatsoever, but it's decorated beautifully with geometric patterns and Arabic inscriptions of passages from the Quran. This is the insignia of Suleiman the Magnificent from 16th century Turkey. These royal seals were often created by specialized scribes in a way that nobody could read, but more importantly, nobody could forge. So we have all this beautiful calligraphic history spanning centuries in the Middle East into the 50s and the 70s, and now suddenly in contemporary times we have things like this. Which have no historical precedent whatsoever. They're purely reflections of the limitations of the technology. I'm a little afraid to bring up sans serifs after yesterday, but they're a good example of an innovation in type design that does have a historical precedent. The difference is that they were born out of expression rather than constraints. So the sans followed the serif, which followed calligraphy, and Arabic type is missing that progression. So this phenomenon was sort of the seed that grew into my thesis. I was interested in the idea of modern Arabic and how it appears in the world today. So I was asking all these questions like, why does Arabic type look the way it does today? And what defines our contemporary vernaculars, and where do they come from? Why does the vast majority of contemporary Arabic type look so different from the beautiful calligraphy we saw before? So through my research, I found that the origins of this rupture in the evolution of the Arabic script was the invention of the metal movable type printing press in 15th century Europe, which obviously was created for Latin. The first use of Arabic movable type was to promote Christian conversion in the Middle East. So here we see 2 pages from the first printed book using Arabic movable type, the Book of Hours. And here Arabic was adjusted to be compatible with the discrete letter structure of the press, and this led to the creation of simplified Arabic, which is quite tragic, as Lara Kaptan would say, because it abandons key characteristics like certain ligatures and variable baselines that make the Arabic script what it is. But in 2009, Thomas Milo's team at Decotype created the advanced composition engine, which finally brought our type technology up to speed with the full requirements of the script. It's really complicated and I don't fully understand it at all, but basically it breaks the script down into elemental building blocks rather than treating the letters as discrete forms. And so here's the problem that we have. Arabic type designers have spent around 150 years from 1860 to 2009 designing Arabic type with Latin constraints. But what happens now that the technology has caught up to the demands of the Arabic script? Before we had this technology, it made sense that so much of the Arabic we were seeing was Latinized. There was also a big demand for it. One example that was immediately obvious to me as I was looking around in Lebanon was the luxury storefronts. When brands want to expand their business to the Middle East, because there's a lot of money there, they need to Arabize their logos. So we see things like this, where the Arabic is created after the Latin to match it in a very literal way. And this isn't inherently wrong, but it's not really beneficial to the advancement of Arabic type either. Like James Edmondson said yesterday, we can strive for so much more than looking legit. Capitalist demands can't be the only driving force for what we create. So instead of looking like Latin characters, another path is to try to replicate calligraphy in digital type. This has value because it allows us to study basic principles of the script, like contrast and letter shaping, and it follows the same logic as learning Latin-based type design. The first project anyone does is usually a revival, and this step is necessary but not sufficient. So for Arabic type to reach its full potential, we have to use the technology, not to replicate the past, but to reshape the future, to solve new problems and ask new questions. It's completely unclear what that will look like, but I think that's the most exciting part. And that's what modernism is at its core, another dangerous word from yesterday, or at least what it was before it was reduced to a stylistic toolset. Think grotesque, grid, left align. It was a belief in the power of the present and a constant redefining of the norm, a conversation with tradition that was ongoing. I think Phil Baines was pretty spot on when he said this in 1992. I see tradition as a living thing, an ongoing understanding of practicalities and conventions which each age must interpret as necessary according to its own needs, learn and benefit from, and then pass on. It is not a static set of rules to be slavishly obeyed. So back to Lebanon, I want everyone to close their eyes for a minute and picture Beirut. Please don't fall asleep. What do you see? Do you see restaurants, malls, nightclubs, beaches, and mountains? Or do you see roadside merchants, refugees, traffic jams, cargo trucks, and bullet-ridden buildings? Okay, now open your eyes. This is Beirut. This is Beirut too. This too. And this is Beirut today. Lebanon is a complex country that has been transformed by war. No collection of photos could possibly capture its multitudes, its cosmopolitan beauty, and its scars of war. The Lebanese Civil War lasted 15 years and was a major turning point in the country's history. During the war, Beirut was split into halves. West Beirut was predominantly Muslim, and East Beirut was predominantly Christian. And historically, the French had established ties with local Christians, creating a legacy of French education and culture in much of Christian Lebanon. So for that reason, when Beirut was split, the Muslim West side preferred Arabic and the Christian East preferred French. But when the war finally ended, people wanted to come together again, and one key way in which this manifested was through language. In storefronts and in everyday social interactions, using multiple languages proved that you were modern and accepting. This practice still survives today, and you can see it pretty much everywhere throughout the country. So back to my project. When I went back to Lebanon 2 years ago, I noticed this phenomenon. I couldn't take my eyes off the roadside signage. Add to it the fact that I'm fluent in English, nearly fluent in French, and somewhat competent in Arabic, if we're being like super generous. And I'm sure you can understand why I was staring out the car window in awe. So my design education here in the US trained me to appreciate function, grid systems, objectivity, but I still found beauty and paradoxical order in Lebanon's vernacular signs, which were largely, by my standards, quote-unquote, ugly. Yesterday, Jerome said something that reflects the inner conflict I was having at the time. He said, ask yourself if modernism is your standard for what constitutes good design. So I first set out with my camera to take pictures of these signs, and when my sister saw what I was doing, she asked, are you going to make Lebanon look bad? And because my answer was, of course, no, my initial goal became to challenge a Western audience to rethink what they consider modern. I returned from the trip with over 1,000 photos, all taken en route from the back of my grandpa's car. The subjects were all typographic, from the calligraphy painted on the backs of cargo trucks to the shiny luxury type in storefronts. The graphics on the trucks, though, were the most intriguing to me because they felt like the truest expression of the native calligraphic forms of the Arabic script. In Lebanon, farmers and truck drivers decorate their vehicles as a form of spiritual protection against the risks that come with being on the road all the time. They often write out blessings or prayers. For instance, here it says, "My Lord, protect her," her being the bus. Sometimes the drivers use symbols like the evil eye to protect themselves from harm caused by other people's envy of their truck's beauty. This bus wards off the evil eye quite literally, saying, "Take your eyes off of me." This one says, "Shame on the eye, keep calm." This one, "God bless." Drivers often consider their trucks to be either their alter egos or their lovers because it's the one thing they spend the most time with all day, every day. It's their primary companion. And so the bottom of this truck reads "Bride." It's pretty weird. This one says, "Alan's darling." Alan is probably the driver. This one predictably also says "God bless," and it has a sort of proverb written on it too. It says, "He who has confidence in his step walks like a king." This one's my favorite. It just says, "I am the genius." And it's just like shittily spray painted on there. Didn't even try. This one's pretty blunt. It says, "I seek the satisfaction of God and my parents." So I wanted to wrap up today by showing the poster I made for the senior exhibition, which I created by taking all the vernacular type and logos from my photos and digitizing them. I was struggling to think of one singular image or message that could capture contemporary Lebanon, so I decided to include them all. And here it is. The Lebanese architect and archivist George Arbid said, "When you speak of heritage in this part of the world, you straight away start thinking about ancient things. For us, it's a politically wrong position because it would mean that modernism is the other and tradition is us. The question of what modernity means for Lebanon is tricky. Everyone has a different answer, and those answers often lead to more questions, but I know that there are ones worth asking. We need to radically reimagine how we conceive of ourselves outside of established Western conventions, whether in describing our identity or designing our language. It's not about how we're seen, but about how we see ourselves." Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Chantal. Oops. Yes, there we go. That's right. Let's make it move too. Nope. There we go. Much better. So our last presenter is Armin Vid. Armin was born and raised in Mexico City. Armin is a graphic designer and writer now living in Bloomington, Indiana. He's a co-founder of Under Consideration, a design firm generating its own projects and content while taking on limited client work. Although he has written for most well-known design publications, he is most recognized for his writing on the blogs that make up Under Consideration, particularly Brand New, a blog for opinion on corporate and identity work. Along with his partner, Brioni Gomez Palacio, Armin has co-authored various books and has organized multiple design events, including the Brand New Conference and bi-monthly Austin Initiative for Graphic Awesomeness speaker series. And in a, very designers love meta things, so this is a very meta moment. We're going to have Armin talk about branding, a branding conference at a conference. So please welcome Armin.
All right, I know it's the last talk of the day. I want to make sure that you're awake, you're with me. First thing I want to do is make sure that the sound is working. All right? It's okay, I am from Mexico. It's okay for me to use mariachi music. It is not offensive. So So you are sort of with me, but to make sure that you're with me, I want to give you like a little bit of an amuse-bouche, if you will, mixing puppies and heavy metal. Wait. All right. Good. Enough of that. Hello. It is a pleasure to be here at Typographics, and I have a lot of stuff to show you, so I'm going to go really quick and get straight into it. As Alexander mentioned, I am here to talk to you about branding, a branding conference for branding designers. That's the title that you've seen on the website. That's the title on your program. But as I was preparing this presentation, as I was preparing this presentation, I realized that a more appropriate or alternate title would be 9 times typography saved my ass. And that's actually, I think that's going to be my epitaph on my tombstone. It's just going to say, typography saved his ass, M dash, multiple times. And the reason why that is that I am not an illustrator. I cannot even letter to save myself. I don't think I'm that creative or that conceptual. But when it comes to typography, I can choose it, I can rearrange it, and I can make it do things that otherwise would not allow. It's the only way that I can make a living. So typography has saved my ass multiple times, but I'm going to show you 9 times that it has done so. Before I do that, a little bit of a background, specifically about the brand new conference. The shorthand for it is BNConf. I put that up because you're going to see that shorthand multiple times. So the brand new conference is a direct extension of the brand new blog, which I started back in 2006, has gone through numerous iterations over the years, but the premise has remained the same, which is writing opinions on logo and identity redesigns or new logo and identity introductions by well-known companies, products, or services that you might recognize. And the opinions are mostly written by myself. For a while, we used to have guest authors, but that didn't work out. So over the last 13 years, I have written over 6,000 opinions on logos and identities, which is a stupid way to spend your life, but that's where I ended up. This is the most recent version of the blog. Nowadays, we include a little bit more content, but the premise has remained exactly the same. We don't talk about music, we don't talk about posters, we don't talk about books, just logo identity redesigns or new designs. And that has made it a fairly popular blog. It now has 2.1 million page views a month, which I'm not up here to brag about. But again, the fact that it's such a narrow focus that has garnered it so much attention is kind of like mind-blowing to me. So the brand new conference, we did not start it as some sort of altruistic or entrepreneurial initiative. It was just, we needed to survive. We did the first one in 2010. So after the 2008 recession, we were shit out of luck with design work. We had no clients. Up until that point, all of our design work had come from word of mouth and referrals. So when we needed to go out and look for clients, we had no idea how to do it. So we're like, all right, we need to figure out some other way to do it. So we put all of our savings, most of our savings, into launching a conference, thinking that, well, if logo identity and branding works so well for a blog, maybe it will work as well for a conference if we keep the focus just to that, logo identity and branding. So 2010, one-day conference here in New York at the School of Visual Arts Theater. I think it fits 415 people or 450, I can't remember. We sold out. The audience loved it, speakers enjoyed it, sponsors appreciated it, we loved it, we made our money back, then we even turned a profit, and we're like, oh yeah, that's awesome, let's see how we can keep growing it. So for the next 3 years, we kept it the same. One-day conference for about 400 people, single day, single track, everybody experiences the same thing. In 2014, we went to Chicago. We turned it into a 2-day conference. 750 people showed up. We're like, yay, we survived. 2 days is as hard as 1 day, so let's just keep going with 2 days. 2-day conference. Easy there, fella. In 2016, we took the conference to Nashville. 1,000 people came. We're like, awesome, people will travel to the conference. And that has sort of become our, both our comfort zone as well as it's challenging enough to do a 2-day conference for 1,000 people. And the conference is all done by me and my partner and wife, Bryony Gomez Palacio. And yeah, someone is a fan of Bryony, as am I, as I should be. Because we spend all of our time together. We work from home 24/7 together. She's actually watching right now. Hi. With my kids, so I'm not supposed to drop F-bombs. And I'll do my best, but who knows. I guess there's only the two of us. We work from home. It's awesome. So, 9 times typography has saved my ass. I'm going to start with the first one, obviously. I'm going to take you through all 9. And one thing that's important to understand is that much like this conference, where it's a typography conference for typography users and type designers, and you can't just like half-ass the design. Since in our case, it's we're designing an identity for a conference about identity for identity designers, and on top of that, I run a blog where I make critiques, positive and negative, of other people's work. So we really have to walk the walk as much as we talk the talk. So 2010, being our first conference, we're like, let's just take it easy, see what happens. Chose a typeface, Climax by Andre Jobs for Typotech. Put it in some pretty colors, more pretty colors. The most exciting thing that we did was we trimmed the C and the O so that it wouldn't do that, see that thing? So instead we'll do that, just to match the counter spaces of the lovely font and as well as the leading. So, attention to detail. We made some swag, one color of swag, it was fine, got the job done. Good for us, we survived. San Francisco, 2011, for no reason whatsoever, we wanted to emulate sign painting. We realized, we don't know how to do sign painting, so we found this guy. That's not his face, that's a GIF. But just to protect his identity, let's call him, I don't know, Jack, John, Joe, whatever. And he turns out that he does sign painting, so we said, hey, John, Jack, Joe, whatever, can you sign paint all these things for us? And he said, yeah, sure. And he sent us these really big sheets that we had to cut up and put into the scanner to clean up and make into actually usable assets for the conference. And this was the main reason why we wanted to do sign painting for those 9s. We love those 9s and .95, etc. And he also sign painted all the speaker names, companies, and where they came from. And we sort of realized that Joe, Jack, John, whatever his name is, he was maybe not the best sign painter, as evidenced by San Francisco. We started with San Francisco. He just gave up. He couldn't quite bring. So what we realized is that whenever his sign painting got small, he just couldn't do it. It was only when he had the full brush stroke. So our fault. So we put that into a website, made the program, paired it with Proxima Nova, and made some swag that is not advancing. There we go. And it's good that it's not advancing, because this is my least favorite identity. It has numbers, whatever. Don't matter. It gets better from here. New York 2012, we started to play with trends. And one of the trends at the time was the heavy use of Gotham by Heffler and Ferret Jones at the time, and kind of like the bold geometric sans serif. And at the time, there was also this trend of heavy patterning, not just patterns, but really heavy ornate patterning. So we kind of built our own very strict, very geometric letters. And then each of those letters is divided in a square grid and a concentric circle grid. Yeah, you can see that here. Good. And then we use that grid to make it into little pieces, and then we colorize those pieces. And then we thought, yeah, that's cool. Let's keep going. Let's say, let's build a whole title. We current the E and the W because we're not assholes. We want to take care of our people, so we current the E and the W to do that because it's important. Again, attention to detail. So we arrived at that, and we thought, cool, that's patterny enough, but can it be more patterny? So we thought, can we include logos into those little pieces? And yeah, we could if we wanted to get sued by every single company that we included in here. So we realized, okay, we cannot use the Apple logo, but we can use the leaf in the Apple logo to make a pattern. We can't use the FedEx logo, but we can use the arrow in the FedEx logo. If I just blew someone's mind, get out. Didn't know if that was going to work or if people were going to be like, what do you mean? Anyway, so you can't use the UPS logo, but we can use the ribbon in the UPS logo to make a pattern. So we used elements from 12 different logos, and then we kind of like shoved those inside the texture that you can't quite see here, but up close you can see the patterns in there. And again, it wasn't, you shouldn't be, the idea wasn't that you would look at the type like, oh, that's the leaf from the Apple logo. It was just to create texture, but at least have a reason why we were doing so much texture. Put that on the website. This was the first time that we did a little bit more of an ambitious program. This is a big format program with a purple paper and clear foil, red stitching on the spine, really nice and pretty. We did a poster that you can't see for shit here. And that was sort of the purpose. It was a clear foil with blind letterpress, and it was those letters and the textures and all that. And we actually, it won the best of show at the Typographics Club annual a few years ago. So well done, Armin. Yeah, so it was a nice treat to have that, but moving on. New York 2013, still playing off of trends. Now you might remember like this X device that people were using in their logos, and it didn't matter what the logo was for. It could be for a bakery, it could be for a hairdresser. It was had X and those little things and type and doodads and very finicky. And if you're wondering, the trend is alive and well. This is taken yesterday over here at NYSER for what is it? Taylor. So there you go. It works for everything. So we thought, all right, can we take that X and make something more uncomfortable, like take it to the other extreme, and instead of making it pretty and designy and cool, just make it really kind of like awful in a way. So we were trying to find a way to shove the B, the N, the C, and the 13 into those spaces of the X, and all like still within those kind of like invisible triangles in there. And we ended up with these 4 logos that are kind of like uncomfortable and ugly. And you're like, yeah, you succeeded at that. Yeah, that's ugly as shit. But that was the point. The point wasn't to make something cool and pretty, but just to actually take that trend of the X to a weird extreme. So once we had those 4 different logos that with the letters rotating around the X, then we thought, oh, we can use those different places on the program. And you might look at that photo and be like, oh, cool, you printed the logo in different places, but no, those are hand-sewn into a grid of laser-cut circles that then, looks like this, finished up close. So we're still doing a 500-person attendee conference, so kind of like sort of easy enough to hand sew. And I can say easy because I didn't do shit. My wife did everything. One thing that you have to understand is that I do most of the computer stuff, and she's the mastermind behind all the manual labor that we do and that you'll see through the next identity. So what that does is that you can have the logo anywhere on the cover because it's basically a pixel grid, and the logo adheres to the pixel grid in any place that you put it on. We did the same thing for the podium, where it's just a pegboard that we got from Home Depot, painted it yellow, and, all right, come on now. Come on, no? All right, let me just move in here and see what's going on. All right, I might come back to the center, so keep the lights there. Let's see if it's, yeah, now it's unlocked. All right, so kind of like also hand-sewn on the pegboard. All right. Chicago 2014, now we started to play with the idea of referencing the city where we're going to host the conference. So Chicago, we're like, oh, remember the original Mac? It had a set of bitmap typefaces that were all named after cities, one of them being Chicago, and then it was also redrawn in 1991 by Bigelow and Holmes when the Mac was able to render curves. So we thought there was something interesting about mixing those 2 things, but just using the font Chicago for a conference in Chicago was pretty a dumb idea. So we kind of tried to figure out what else can we build into the identity to make it more interesting. So another interesting thing about Chicago is that it has a significant stock exchange, and we really like the density of the boards of the stock exchange and the modularity of them. And kind of like still playing off the idea of the trends, a trend at the time was wiggles. And there's nothing conceptual about it. It's just putting wiggles on things. And so it was really stupid. We're like, hey, that's kind of cute, so let's see what we can do. So combining both Chicago versions with our own wiggles and squiggles and weird stuff, we started creating this modular kind of like alphabet system that we could mix and match. And it would always read 2014 brand new conference as you rearranged it. And I think I'm going too fast for my little clicker. Damn it, come on. All right. Unlock it. Yeah, 2014 brand new conference. And then we built that into a pattern that we use on the website. That same pattern we put into, I think yeah, there we go. Yeah. They told me don't stand behind the column. Yeah, you can see me. All right, so we use that for the tote bag. I think all right, I'll stay here. Fine, you win, stupid clicker. All right. So we use that in the tote bag as well as in the program for, you can see the black, you can't really see the black background wheel here, but it has a spot gloss varnish. It has those white things or a sticker that you can place at different heights of the program, so it will always read 2014 brand new conference. New York 2015. We wanted to reference kind of like the grittiness of 1970s New York with the use of graffiti and like how dirty it used to be. So we chose Tripper Pro from Underwear, and we thought, well, it's fine to use a stencil font, but let's actually use the stencil font as it was meant to be used, and actually use it as a stencil. So anytime we would use Tripper Pro, it would have to be spray painted by hand. Another element that we wanted to include in the identity was this other side of New York, like the opulence, the luxury, how much money you need to live in New York at a certain lifestyle. So we wanted to reference that through the use of, so we paired that with Obsidian from Heffler & Co., which is kind of like this really elegant, really luxurious typeface that created that contrast that you can see in New York nowadays, or even contrasting 1970 New York to 2019 New York. So all the company names for all the speakers were, were spray painted by hand. Then that gave us one element to use in the identity. And then, so that was easy. That we scanned those, put them in the computer, it was fine. But for the programs, we wanted to spray paint each program by hand. At this point, we're already at 1,000 people, so we had to spray paint a shitload of covers. And the way to do that, tricked you, yeah? The lights were coming on. It's not working anymore, so I'm gonna stick to here. I just like to roam. I feel more connected to you that way. So we came up with these stations that allowed us to spray paint, put in the covers, spray paint each one by hand. We had 6 different designs and then 4 different colors of paper. So we did like 1,500 of these because eventually 500 just went to the trash between going to the printer and the binder and the other printer. But in the end, we had those painted covers. On top, we put gold foil. So again, the idea of contrasting the grittiness of spray paint with the classiness of gold foil, and 4 different color papers, 4 different designs, just like really yummy stuff. The tote bags were also spray painted, and those were finished off with gold silkscreen. The name badges were little pieces of wood, spray painted, finished off with gold silkscreen. And again, those things are just like, you can't fake those textures with any sort of printing method. So we went ahead and literally spray painted the shit out of everything in our conference. We didn't spray paint PolarShare out of respect, but otherwise, we just have kept going with those stencils, spray painting people. All right, Nashville, 2016. One of the great things about Nashville is the country music, and an even greater thing are the suits that some of those country singers wear that have this ornate floral elements and birds and butterflies and all kinds of pretty stuff, and rhinestones, like real rhinestones worth money. So there was that element. And then there was also, hat show print is there. We had a great tradition of wood type printing. So we went out and tried to find the wood typiest wood type that we could find, and that turned out to be Behemoth by House Industries, because it was like it had the biggest slabs, it had the biggest surface that we could then draw our own patterns on top of it. So we did that for each of the B and C, O, and F, and then, like, in my mind, like when the lights go down on stage, that's what happens. So, kind of like going back to the idea of wood type, we actually wanted to make wood type. These are like 4-foot high letters that we did almost the old-fashioned way with an actual with a CNC router. Made the C, made the F, did all the other ones, of course, but I don't have photos of all of them. Transferred the designs onto them using chalk. Again, that's Bryony hand painting each one of them, then me taking photos, so yeah, yay me. But yeah, so this is on our kitchen counter. Sometimes we had to choose between dinner or letters. Most often than not, it was the letters one. And this is the size relationship in relation to our king-size bed. And like the country suit, like the suits that they have the rhinestones and the glitter, we wanted our letters to also glitter as well. So we tricked them out with just Christmas lights from like the dollar store. And we could set to different pulses. And from the back, it's like super ghetto. But from the front, like and we set it to like a nice low pulsing timing, and it just looked beautiful on screen, and with the dark light, it looked great. All right, two more. 2017, Chicago. You've either walked by it, you've seen it in pictures, the Bean, or officially the Cloud Gate by Anish Kapoor. And what we loved about this sculpture is how it distorts what's around it, what's underneath it, what's to its sides. So we thought, okay, that's one thing that we want to reference this year. And the other thing was like the grid of downtown Chicago that's as lovely as the grid of New York. Yes, yours is better, whatever, Chicago, second city, we get you. But what we liked too was just like the arteries that come into downtown Chicago, and we thought that Torque by Type Supply sort of encompassed those two things, the gridness and then the angle. So, just an excuse to use a cool typeface. So, having that in mind, we applied the Bean filter to it, which is not really a thing. We actually worked with 3 Bear Studio, and they helped us do some animations that then we could use on the website, that we use on during the day of the event as well. I'm just going to let that play for a little bit while I drink some water and give my clicker the evil eye. So we had those kind of like motion applications, but then we were also able to grab stills and do the swag, and this was a very fantastic reflective fabric that we found in China. You can't find stuff like this in the U.S. It was probably has some, it's probably illegal in the U.S., but no, it was fine. And so we still screened those with black ink, blue ink. It was a really reflective fabric, which is insane. And then the badges were all in this like static-free little bags that usually have the RAM in them. And we actually silk screened those ourselves because no silk screen printer wanted to do it because they said, no, it's too small, no, it's too slippery, no, it's too tight to the edges. And we're like, yes, it is all of those things. And we're still going to figure out how to do it. So for our first time, it turned out pretty good. And then the program is just Torque blind debossed on another reflective paper. And what was great, and we didn't plan this, people then went out to the Bean because the venue was like right behind or in front of the Bean. So people went and took pictures with the reflective stuff, which we thought was awesome. Last one, New York 2018. So that was last year. We wanted to use concrete, so that was our thing. We knew we wanted to use concrete, so we sort of retrofitted the concept to be about concrete. So New York is the concrete jungle, which is kind of a cliche, but hey, it has the word concrete in it. So what makes New York the concrete jungle? It is the buildings. What makes some of the buildings cool are inscriptions like this. What is cool about some of these inscriptions is that they use high contrast sans serif typefaces. And so we thought, let's go out and find a family of a suite of different high contrast sans serif typefaces and build the identity. Out of that, we use Chap as the main typeface. And then what's cool about this is the recessed type in the concrete. So we wanted to replicate that. So we started testing molds, seeing if we can put that on the program that we give out to the attendees. And we're like, yeah, we can do that. And can we do the badges as well? How thick is too thick? How thin is too thin? And after many, many tests, we figured out what kinds of molds to do, what kind of concrete to use, how much we had to dry. So those are the programs. This is for the badges. So we had to do like 1,100, 1,200 of these things. We gave little cubes as mementos to each attendee. So those are that. And then in the end, you have those are actual concrete covers glued on a piece on the program. And they're all different because the concrete reacts in different ways to the environment and to humidity and to whatever mood the concrete is in. And it has all these amazing imperfections that just give it this really amazing texture. Those are the badges. And again, you look at it up close, and you can, it's almost like those pictures that I showed earlier. And by the way, some of those pictures of buildings were by Paul Shaw, so shout out to Paul Shaw and his amazing New York touring stuff. The little cubes, the cubes stack more freely, and a close-up of that. So in aggregate, when you look at all of that, we hope that that you see that these 9 identities reflect how we use typography, which is a combination of a number of approaches, sometimes on their own, sometimes in combination, and they range from making unorthodox choices to exploring techniques, embracing complexity, giving ugliness a chance, building systems, going analog, honoring the past, distorting reality, and most importantly for us is never backing down. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that moment of meta. We have a final spotlight, and right after that, we're gonna ask all the speakers from today to join us on stage for a Q&A and roundup. So please give a moment to Carrie Hamilton.
Hi, everyone. I'm obviously the last of the spotlight speakers, and I'm very proud and honored to say that I am also now a new member of the Type Directors Club board. Yay! As everyone knows, the TDC is a highly venerated global organization that goes back to 1946. It hosts competitions and events and gallery shows and workshops and salons, and it boasts a long list of distinguished practitioners, both within its membership and among the board. That's highly esteemed company. And without being overly self-deprecating, I confess that maybe just a little, I wonder what I might have done to have gotten here. I'm a graphic designer, and I also teach graphic design at City College. I've also been attending TDC events for so long that I don't really remember which of those that I attended was my first. My earliest recollection relating to the TDC was seeing Eileen Strizzer giving a talk in which she explained, among other things, that the reason why we so often see bad spacing within groups of numbers, like dates, in running text, is that the default spacing in most fonts is tabular, meaning that it was designed to cause numbers to align in tables. If we wanted to change that through the then brand new miracle of OpenType, we could change the spacing among those figures from tabular to proportional. This was very big news for me, but what impressed me even more was that when Eileen told us that, there was a slight pause in the room, and then everyone in unison said, "Whoa." That sealed the deal for me. I knew that I had finally found my place, my people. A group of individuals who, no matter how accomplished they were or would become, would always say, "Whoa," whenever they learned something new about type. At around the same time, I began taking pictures of found lettering with my phone and posting them on Instagram. There are a lot of people that do that, obviously, although I like to think that each of us brings our own perspective to that endeavor. For me, this process was simply a natural extension of what I've been doing nearly every day of my life, which is wandering around New York City, saying, "Wow, look at that," but usually to myself. Now I was beginning to share that experience. My friends in the type community were instantly supportive, volunteering how much they liked my pictures and encouraging me to keep going. I really thought this practice would be over in a matter of weeks, but instead I found the more photographs of letters I made, the more letters seemed to appear in my path, waiting to be photographed. It was in this heightened state of awareness of my surroundings that had been brought on by all this picture taking that I began to see pipes differently and to photograph them. And Sasha was kind enough to allow me to show a couple of my pipe pictures, as they're called. I know that perhaps a couple of you already follow me on Instagram, but for those who don't, or don't know what I'm talking about, the pipes that I'm referring to here obviously are not the kinds that you play or smoke, although I definitely have a few followers who were looking for the smoking kind when they found me. The kinds of pipes that I photograph in these examples here behind me. And if you wish, you can also take a look at my photos on my Instagram. My handle is Carrie Hamilton, spelled C-A-R-R-I-E, like the movie Hamilton. Scroll down a little bit because I was in Italy for a couple of weeks and there weren't that many pipes there. Okay, so in the image on the right, the pipe on the right is called a standpipe. That's the only thing I know about it. I only know that, and I only know that because sometimes you see them with a little sign that says standpipe on the front. I don't even know what the pipe next to it is called. I don't know what they do. I don't know why they're there. I know that pipes of various sorts can be found in abundance in neighborhoods where buildings built in the late 19th and early 20th century have been allowed to remain, like Soho, Tribeca, the Flatiron District, and the Garment District. What interests me, though, about these pipes is that they appear in peculiar and distinctive configurations that I'm sure were arrived at by accident and went unnoticed, and that seem to take on a strange life of their own. Whereas these two are clearly a couple of some sort on the right, perhaps more of a duo, the group over on the left is more of a cohort, or maybe a family, or a flock. By the way, these pipes over here on the left, those are called gas vents. I don't know what those do either. When Zipeng Zhu said yesterday that he hated animation, I could totally relate. Just once, I'd like to go straight from one place to another without one of these pipes jumping out in front of me and demanding to have its picture taken, but I digress. When I began posting these images, I fully expected to start losing friends quickly, both of the digital and actual variety. Quite the opposite occurred, however, particularly among my fellow type enthusiasts. Some would confess, somewhat sheepishly, that they too had begun to see pipes everywhere. I am truly grateful to have found this community, and I am doubly excited to be on the TDC board. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Carrie. So we're going to move into the roundup Q&A session. We're going to ask all the speakers from today to join us on stage. And if you have questions, please come up to the two microphones in the aisles. As soon as someone there will call you to ask a question, and we'll gather here for a second. First of all, thank you to everyone who's here sitting on stage. Let's give them a round of applause. This was a very, very fantastic day. I appreciate your generosity in being here. And since everyone is a participant, we encourage, if you all have questions for each other, to please ask. This is very much kind of an interactive part. So hopefully the audience and us, we're all here together.
I just kept, I'm sure you all noticed too. First of all, I'm so inspired by all of these fantastic talks today. I'm thrilled. But there kept being these crazy crossovers. There's assholes and the Mueller report, and just things that kept, like, is design modern from MoMA coming up, and Pentagram. And, but one of the things I was thinking about was the atomium, that big sculpture in Brussels that Sarah DeBont showed yesterday, and how that was really kind of a metaphor for almost everyone's talk, how no one's working in a sort of conventional matrix anymore. We're looking at like 3 dimensions for information, or you know, other like sort of breaking out of existing models, and how work has to fit in those models, and everybody's kind of rethinking how those systems work. So I think my question was kind of for Georgia about, had you, I mean, of course you're doing that too, but is any of that, do you think about that in a sort of non-linear way, or something that can be systematized?
You mean information in general, or with the premise of design and how?
I guess either one or both.
Would you be able to narrow the question down? Otherwise, I will speak for 40 minutes.
Too much data.
Right. Well, I guess I'm wondering. It seems to be like a particular response to those situations. Are there ways that can be systematized? Or is that maybe not one of your interests?
I just am not sure that I'm understanding the question.
I think a lot of what.
Also, I feel I was not here yesterday, so I think I missed a lot of the talks. This is probably why I missed the context.
I think, well, part of, and Barbara and I have been talking since this morning about it's a challenge sort of like to, we're kind of processing a lot of the impressions from the day, and like there's so much to comment on, and we're trying to not comment on things and actually sort of prompt this. So a lot of what we're trying to kind of spurn from is like coming from our personal sort of reflections of the comments that we've had to the experience of these things. It feels like there's definitely like a different way of looking at things, and design is doing things very differently. I think that's something that came across a lot of the conversations today and yesterday, but I think mostly, I think it was very visible today in terms of how there's a different way of thinking about design's role. I think there's a very clearly a shift, and there's a few sort of threads here, and when like maybe we can sort of unpack some of these things, but to me there's definitely like a different sense of thinking about data and thinking about information and the information's effect on design, and sort of the way it might, as you said, you know, design driving data rather than, there's also like this notion of public-private, how that is becoming challenged as well. And I think a lot of that maybe at the core is sort of a reaction, like a design is reacting to a certain context. And
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I feel that right now we have so many materials available, so many technologies, so many ways of look at things, and audiences start to understand what is design, understand the value. They definitely now understand what data information is, and so I feel that now I understand your question. Is there a way to systematize that? I feel that the more we experiment with things, the more we understand what works and what doesn't. And even with data, with information, with typography, with all of the materials, by getting out of our comfort zones and pushing the discipline, well, understand what doesn't work and what doesn't resonate, what is too complicated, what is just like not resonating with people, and then I feel that from there we'll be able to start systematizing what works and what doesn't, meaning like being a bit, well, going after experiments and after them trying to make taxonomies in our minds of what works and what doesn't. But I feel that I'm also very interested in the intersection of all of this, and again, to me, and specifically to my work, well, data is the material that I use as a designer. I don't do graphic design that it doesn't have data behind, but just because this is not how I've been trained. But I feel that, again, right now data can be a material for our design as typographies, as symbols and tools that we use are. And I think that to pass the question to Lisa, you were so ahead of time using that. Have you seen some changes since you started and now? Well, in all of that, in how well data and design and information interplay, and how people kind of like react and perceive that.
Thanks for passing on. I had this, I think this is related, a diagram in my head of of me or you know, an individual, maybe on top, and then content, data, products, services, all of this other stuff that we have to access, and this sort of middle layer of platforms. And it does seem like design and is sort of set free now. It's again, there used to be client requests for certain artifacts, and we used to have a much more direct relationship between products and content and services. I mean, there was always media in between, but it does seem like, and I've seen this today too, that what we make really are systems, which is why type is so important, and it just kind of travels wherever it goes. I mean, who knows what's next with social media? I'm kind of curious what you guys think, but it seems like it's the, I don't know, like everything has its own, we're almost like inventing new media forms as we design, and it seems really free, which I think is exciting and maybe terrifying in some ways too.
Does anyone have anything to?
Do you want to say something?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think another thing that seemed to pop up kind of within the conversations was the idea of kind of how complex, obviously, graphic design is, but how many people are involved. And I think like it came up in the first talk this morning with Matthew's talk about the role of credits. And I think that's something that, for me personally, being a graphic designer first, but also a curator in a design collection, the credits for me become crucial, and full credits, not just the one name that often gets kind of erased. And I wonder if there's something you could maybe share about that perception of how design credits have been, perhaps they may be changing now, like the idea of like, is it better? Are credits being better? Obviously in your case you're very generous in acknowledging the people you've worked with, but is that something that should we be doing better?
Type designers are at the bottom of the food chain. Our work goes out there. We depend on, what is fascinating for me to be at a conference like this, to see how many ways people use type, many of which I've never imagined before. I think giving credit is important, not just for ego reasons. I think that in a business like mine, which for a long time was anonymous, it's very difficult now to know who did things in the past. I imagine it would be impossible to research who actually did the work that Marta showed at Nebbiolo in the early days. That's gone, it's lost. And a lot of the people that I knew in the 60s, 70s, and so on were totally anonymous, the people who worked at Linotype and Monotype and that sort of thing. So I think it is worth crediting people and keeping tracks on these people. And I wish in a way I'd done more of it myself, because I knew a lot of those people. I did once give a retiring typographer in those days a tape recorder and a bunch of blank tapes and said, do a brain dump, But I wish I'd done more of that, because so much of this gets lost. I don't think that answered your question, but
yeah, I wonder if anyone like on the stage has thoughts about how like credits and especially in collaborative work has changed their perception of how you make work, or
I'm always like really surprised that design work don't have credit, but like in motion and VFX, all of the credits that everyone who's like contributed, like in like the movies, there's like hundreds and hundreds of names, and yeah, that's always surprising to me because in the motion world, that's the norm to list every single person because it's always such a team effort. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has a thought about like why doesn't website, like web design or like product design have the same credit list of everyone who works on it?
I have another, I mean, in relation to what Alan and I talked about today, in terms of the unconventional workflow or everyone kind of working in parallel and kind of crossing tracks, there's another talk that I've given a couple of times about our work that kind of focuses on the influence of people who aren't designers on the design process, and in particular our project and the influence of clients and printers and all of the other constellation of folks who are part of actually making something real. And so in that sense, I mean, I saw a little bit of it today in our talk about Amal from WorkAC and the kind of critical feedback that she gave us on the design of the book that really helped to clarify the end result. And so in that way, I think sometimes like, I don't know, the crediting maybe should either be blurrier or more specific in terms of like all of us being listed as authors, designers, editors, or maybe nobody being listed with any particular role and everyone just kind of having their names in one big pile.
Perhaps Yes, now we're on. All right. So perhaps unpopular, but one of the reasons why we keep our business so small, just me and Bryony, is because we like to take credit for what we do, and we don't want to give credit to anyone else. So it's a very egotistical point of view now, but yeah, it's nice to take credit. And I think, yeah, the more people that get credit because everybody plays, even if it's a small role, I think, for bigger firms that just say like, oh, whatever the company name is, just like designed by X, it's understandable that it's a team effort, but it's also nice to acknowledge as many people as possible because everybody does play a role, no matter how big or small.
Yeah, I can.
In your case, though, it's so amazing because I love knowing that you're pouring cement in your kitchen or whatever. So, like, you're kind of giving away this little piece of yourself and your own labor.
Yeah, sometimes like little pieces of ourselves. Sometimes little pieces of ourselves have fallen into the mix of things.
Your DNA.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that before joining Pentagram, I used to work at a company that I co-founded, and now they are 40 people, and we've been struggling to figure out the right way in clients' project and with the website and when how pieces got published in newspaper to really be able to credit everybody. I mean, I'm not telling anything new, but I saw that when we were able to have all of the names without necessarily having the role, but even like all of the names, all of our designers and developers felt so part of the project that I feel that this is also one of the reasons, because we went out of our way to try to really credit everybody, that in 8 years we've had like pretty much zero turnover. Because I feel that if people really feel part of their work is recognized, even if you need to ask the client twice, please, can you add this name because you forgot it? I mean, I really feel that that matters a lot. Then with journalists it's another situation because sometimes we'll give all of their name and they'll pick one just because, and that's harder. But I feel that we should all, as entrepreneurs or designers who direct a team of people, really try to make an effort. But because it's really like, it comes back to us in a positive way because people will stay.
I should say that this is not really a hard problem for us because my studio is 2 people, so we haven't gotten to that point yet.
I think I agree with everything that was said here with, it's good to take credit and it feels good and, I love it like everybody. From personal experience, actually, with Little Cinema, the sort of immersive theater company that I talked about before, when we just started out, I felt very, I wanted to be credited in all the social posts and everything, and I felt kind of like you mentioned that sometimes I needed to ask like once or twice, just remember to put my name, But I think after time sort of went on. You know, sometimes they remember, sometimes I didn't remember, and just the emotional energy that went into that I didn't want to take care of that anymore. And I actually felt more liberated when I didn't really care if I got credit or not, because I wasn't concentrated on the things that were more interesting for me to do, which was, you know, to keep making more work and not being too worried about the credit. So for me, at least sometimes it's, you know, better not to worry about that. And, you know, I can post what I want, I can publish what I want to my audience, in a sense. And whoever sees it, good. Whoever doesn't see it, also good. The people who know need to know, and it's not the end of the world. But yeah, so I think credit is good, but, you know, in a perspective, maybe.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially if you're talking about like individual, well, you as an individual, I feel that like having been a head of an organization and directing a team of people, I feel that my role was to really make sure that everybody got credited the right way, even though sometimes it really meant like really asking 10 times and like bothering people, and yeah.
It's always fun to bother.
I'm saying this somewhat from the outside perspective of a non-designer, but it's a topic that's come up in a lot of discussions and amongst designers that I've observed, and in teaching a seminar off and on, a thesis seminar for the graphic design MFA group at RISD, that, you know, there's this discussion about credits, but it also sounds like there's discussion about authorship. And this is something that I think we're all still negotiating when there's such a participatory process that, you know, and multivocal process and algorithmic processes. And then some of these traditional linear sort of authorship roles get a little, you know, skewed or disrupted, and sometimes intentionally so. I mean, even in a kind of conceptual art sort of way where the process is the product, or the, you know, the failures are part of the product too. So I'm just hearing a slightly, you know, different conversation also happening, which is that, you know, there's been a lot of talk about designers taking on more authorship, and rightly so. And it's also just kind of trying to evaluate it. You know, how is design content? How is process content? How much are designers themselves actually conditioning, you know, the paradigm so that they are themselves authors?
Do you want to speak about that at all, Braulio? Because you're all about this funny, like, I might see those and have no idea they were an abstraction of your underwear.
Well, I mean, in my case, it's just me doing it because, you know, posters for music world and clubs is not a lot of money. So it just be me doing them. And even the process behind the posters and, you know, photographing underwear, you know, they're not, they don't really pay that much money for me to spend like hours doing it. And it's kind of like trying to get a story and like limit myself to like specific time working on it. Yeah. But I mean, the credit part, I don't know, like nowadays with Instagram and social media, everyone, you know, they're trying to take credit for what they did, and it's, you know, makes total complete sense. But when that's projected like a bigger company, I mean, there's definitely a teamwork that needs to be represented, and when that's credited, I think it's super obvious. Forgot what was the question?
Is it on? Yes. Just to add something more from the historic point of view, because to me it was interesting that a lot of the work I research is done by people that were just part of a company. Their names are completely forgotten. With the Nebbiolo group, we interviewed a person that was actually correcting the punches manually when the machines were not perfect. And he saw himself as a skilled worker, but not as an artist at all. And in the interview, this was a very old man. For the first time, he realized that his skill was actually an art and not just operating a craft. So on one hand, I think it's important to give credit, on the other hand, I think we shouldn't be lazy and always giving credit or finding the same things, because there's a lot of work out there that is maybe less known but still very interesting. This, I think also in searching and proposing project to see to students, for instance, and things, it's very important, and I appreciate a lot that here there was a lot of research in trying not to be lazy and finding things that are less known and more interesting and less obvious. And I think that is also in the sense of credit. It is very easy to, I don't know, talking about posters and talking about, I don't know, Miller-Brockman posters. But there are so many other designers that were as good as, and it probably takes a bit more effort to find out, but I think it's part of our role to try to expand that more and not to be lazy and keep on finding the same project and the same authors. So in the sense of credit, I think also giving credit to people that are not that known. Maybe I liked very a lot the talk yesterday about trying to find in Belgium design women and finding out that there were women designing, even though people were not aware of that. So I think that in the sense of giving credit, it shouldn't be focused only too much on what we do, but also try to expand. Sorry.
Well, it becomes like very exclusionary, like in a sort of unfairly so. Like you look back at the history and it's the common thread of like, where are the, this group or this group, as if it wasn't there or it doesn't exist. It's just because we're not very good at maintaining these records. And I think that's, I think it does feel promising. I think like judging by the conversations we've been having here at Typographics and what seems to be happening out there is that there is a much bigger push to try to fill in a lot of these gaps. I mean, there are massive, massive gaps, and the same names get rolled out. And I think for me, the interesting part about the credits is like exactly the frame that you placed is this idea of finding those names and giving them a voice so that they do become a more complete view of the history and kind of push us forward to not continue to do this. I think, no questions? No questions? Oh, please come up. If you guys, if you're ready, just stand on the microphone, we'll call on you.
All right, do you hear me? Cool. So a little question from Uncoated Magazine. Can you tell about a small failure you have experienced recently? All of you. Thank you.
Who is the question for, or is it just? What? Who is the question for, or is it just? All of them. Can you repeat the question?
Can you tell about a small failure you have experienced recently?
Failures? Okay.
Failure, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, so with the conference, every year we have a failure of some sort. Like with the seal screening that we had done for the first time, we did the first run of the print of those little bags that were printed at 600. We're like, oh man, these are awesome. And then when they dried, they were just horrible. And it was literally a week before the conference. So at that point, you can either sit down and cry, which we did for 5 minutes, but then you just have to say like, man, you just have to get back on the horse and do it again. So yeah, the failures happen every time, and the trick is just to learn from them. And I think it's a cliche that you learn from mistakes, but it's a cliche for a reason. So yeah, you just fail and try to not fail again, because otherwise then you're in deep shit.
During my time on Patriot Act, because we have such a tight deadline, we literally have like a week to do 22 minutes of design and animation. So a lot of the mistakes that end up happening during production get put up on stage because of the literally like the super, super tight, hard deadline. So like the biggest lesson I've learned from all those little tiny design mistakes that only our team will notice is that the show's all about letting go and just embracing the process and like embracing the fact that we're just, telling a story. And yeah, it's a challenge, but things to be learned.
I have another one. So in 2016, we thought we could do the brand new conference in Europe because we had a lot of readers in Europe, and we thought, oh, let's just do it in Amsterdam. It's going to be great. We thought we're going to get 500 people. It's going to be great. We hired we rented an amazing venue. Only 300 people showed up, and we lost $55,000, and it was awful. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
I think we have another question over there.
Hi, yeah, I had a question for Georgia and Lisa. Georgia, you mentioned having a two-way conversation with the companies that collect our data, and I was wondering, given that with social media platforms, the best we get right now is sort of like a document of our quantitative data, just what you think it would look like or what it would take to have a more designed or honest two-way conversation with these social media companies of our data. Sorry?
Yeah, can you repeat the last part of the question?
Oh. I was just wondering what it would look like to have a more designed or honest two-way conversation with social media companies about our data.
Yeah, well, sure. Like what I was referring to in the talk is that I really feel that we are in a very moment in time when, through design, we could probably start to reshape the conversations that we have from brands into customer around data. That, though, needs to pass from companies wanting to do it. And what I was suggesting is that I feel that there will be a moment in time, probably not tomorrow, maybe in 1 year, where, I'm seeing that many brands, hopefully social media platforms included, will need to really own and own the fact that they're collecting data from us. They will not be able to hide anymore because of all of the conversations around privacy and around, the fact that we want our data back. And so, I feel that to answer to your question, there are many things that can be done, but it needs to pass from brands and companies wanting to do it. And the reason why I was suggesting that it's a good moment in time to try is exactly because they're really under the spotlight. Lisa, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And it is, these brands are in this sort of layer between us and these communications, these products that we want to access, and in exchange for taking all of our data. So, it seems like there's some things happening right now, and new solutions, but yeah, there's a lot of work to do.
I'll just add like a tiny thing, imagine even creating more awareness through, I don't know, some sort of like different ways to design the long scroll policy that we all just don't read and just click accept, because ultimately we do want to accept the terms of services, but if we knew that by accepting our data will not only go to Facebook but to the many other collecting parties, and maybe that can be done through like a visual system or something different, at least we'll be more aware, and I feel that any type of change of this kind pass from like being more aware of what's happening.
I just want to say that, I think Georgia, makes such beautiful art from data. So if companies could offer us, artworks with our data, we would probably happily oblige.
I guess I wonder if we're waiting for companies to want to be more honest about the way they deal with our data, we might be waiting a while. Like, what is the role of regulation and government pressure on things like, acknowledging that our lawmakers are hopelessly out of touch with the way the technology works, what do you see as the role of non-governmental forces and kind of forcing the issue of honesty?
That might be another conference, another conversation. I have a lot to say. But.
I think we have time for one question. I think there's something. Sure, if you're quick, sure, yeah, please do.
I'll make it fast. My question is to Chantal and Armin. since both of you mentioned or showed vernacular typography in your work, then reproduced to different degrees, and the idea of giving credit prompted by Matthew in this morning have been stuck in my mind. So my question is, feel free to answer if you have an opinion, how can giving credit, the act of giving credit, coexist or reconcile with our newfound or long-term passion on vernacular typography? Is there a possible solution that we can give credit to vernacular, things that we enjoy so much and see as a counterforce to everything we hate? And yeah, that's a question.
I mean, just going off the conversation about credit before, I think it's really important. I also think there's no excuse for not crediting people. Like, it's not going to take away from your project. But I also, you know, if there's a street sign in Lebanon, I'm not expecting there to be someone's name on the back. But in situations where credit is possible, I think it should always happen. But in terms of the vernacular, I don't think we're necessarily in a place where, you know, you could look around, spot something, and know exactly who did it. But one of my favorite sites for finding credit for people who did something I've seen in the world is fonts in use. So if you've seen something and you know a certain font was used, or you can search by a keyword, I think it's like a really great resource to try to give credit where credit's due.
So I think you were referring to the sign painting that we used, and I think that's, I mean, it's impossible to find credit when things are made for the street, for things to just exist, because they need to as signs to inform people. So I think when we use it, or when designers use it, or when artists use it, I think it's just the act of celebrating something that the people that did it, they may not consider it as an art form that you do. I think it's a nice gesture, as long as you're not stealing. If you're kind of like paying homage to it in some way, I think you know, somebody else might look at that and be like, hey, that's what I do, and no one is saying anything. So yeah, I don't think there's that does not answer the question in any way, but I just think vernacular is awesome, and I think we can use it and just be respectful to it and not try to appropriate it in a bad way or disrespectful way. I think you know, the more we can expose it to more people, the better.
Second question. Oh, there it is. Hi, my question is for Matthew. Yes. You're someone who's in a unique position where you've lived through and worked through a great change in the type industry. And I was wondering what you thought the advantages and disadvantages are of our current world where type is so democratized and digitalized.
I guess it's true that I have survived through a lot of changes in technology, and I'm very happy to be given credit for that. On the other hand, I don't know what else I could have done, except go and be an ornamental hermit somewhere or other. I mean, when the industry changes, I mean, what am I supposed to do? I mean, I've got to adopt the latest technology, you know. I couldn't go on making metal type when everyone else was making phototype, or continue to make phototype when everyone was making digital type. I'm actually endlessly grateful to have survived into the digital age, because I think it's the best way of producing type that's ever existed. Some of the very latest technical, you know, variable fonts which people have been talking about, I'm not quite sure yet what the ultimate value of that will be. I'm sort of suspending judgment on that for a while. But I welcome all of these technical advances and so on. Was that your question?
Great, thank you so much. So, it is the end, but not the end, but first of all, I wanted to thank all the speakers for their time, for being here, for making Typographics what it is. So thank you for all of that. Also, we have to thank the sponsors who make this all possible. The platinum sponsors, Heffler & Co., Adobe, and Google. Our gold sponsors, Monotype, ATA Solutions, LPC Visual. The silver sponsors, Hoffman's Milken Center for Typography, Commercial Type, Morisawa, Glyphs, and Poster House. The LED sponsors, the brass level sponsors, and the pixel level sponsors. I also want to thank the people who are very hardworking Cooper Union staff who have made this possible. There's so much stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Huge thank you. The incredibly hardworking crew of City View back there, Carl, Dave, John, Sam, and Tim. Give them a round of applause. And the three staff working the sides of the aisles, Jason Martin and Pietro doing all the to the incredible team of designers that we have working for us. A lot of them are current students, former students, very close friends, so these are amazing voices you'll be seeing hopefully on stage soon at this conference, and the insane amount of volunteers that it takes to put this on. So Small Type, big contribution. So they're certainly not last. And of course, they're two incredibly important people. Yes. So without these two, there would be no Typographics. So we owe a huge thank you and debt. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you all for being part of it, and we'll see you next year.